अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन, आप देख रहे हैं दी आर्गुमेंट और आज मेरे साथ एक बहुत अहम मेहमान मौजूद होंगे जो कि वाशिंगटन से स्ट्रैटेजिक अफेयर्स एक्सपर्ट हैं। माइकल कुगलमैन उनका नाम है और बहुत ही लॉजिकल एनालिसिस करते हैं अफ़गानिस्तान के हवाले से और ख़ास तौर पे सोशल मीडिया पे पाकिस्तान और इंडिया के हवाले से जो उनकी स्ट्रैटेजीज़ रही हैं उनको ट्रोल भी बहुत किया जाता है। इस वक्त हम उनसे बात करेंगे अफ़गानिस्तान में बदलती हुई सिक्योरिटी और सियासी सूरत हाल के हवाले से। Michael, thank you for joining me. And I know that you have been trolled by a lot of people on social media because you're a critic of the decisions made by Pakistan and India, primarily on the issues of Afghanistan. So, my first question to you is that which country are you expecting that you see will recognize Afghan Taliban Islamic government first?
Well, I mean, I think that clearly Pakistan is very likely to recognize this government. Pakistan, I mean, essentially the outcome in Afghanistan is pretty much exactly what Islamabad has wanted, and that is for there to be some type of non-violent settlement that leads to the Taliban holding a lot of power, and that's what happened. The Taliban entered Kabul with no shots fired, and it's essentially in the process of taking power. And the Taliban, of course, has a long-standing relationship with Pakistan. India, of course, it's a very different story. Only recently, as you noted,
Michael, before moving forward, I would like to stop you here because I want to add that we, while sitting in Islamabad, we do listen to this narrative now that we are far, far away from this strategic depth formula that Pakistan has been following from decades. But now they do say that TTP and TTA, they are same sides, they are same. They are not friends for them.
well, I mean, certainly, I know that the government in Pakistan has indicated that strategic depth is a policy of the past, but my reference was to the fact that there is a long-standing relationship between the two groups, between Pakistan and the Taliban, going back to the 1990s when Pakistan was one of only three countries to recognize the Taliban regime then. So my point is that, just speaking specifically of the relationship between the Taliban and Pakistan and what Pakistan's interests are in Afghanistan, it wants there to be a friendly government, a pro Islamabad government. And one would assume that the Taliban would be a Taliban led government would be that government. Certainly, there are differences between Pakistan and the Taliban, some very notable ones, including the fact that the Taliban does not recognize the Durand line like most Afghans. But I just assume that not just Pakistan, but also China and perhaps even Russia would be willing to recognize this new government much more quickly than many other countries in the region, and certainly the United States and other NATO countries would be.
Michael, we have heard this statement, and it is being reported that China is most probably going to say that maybe they're ready for the friendly relationship with Taliban. How do you see that? Is that going to happen soon in few days?
Well, China has always been very practical and is perfectly comfortable working with any type of government or regime that would enable it to help pursue its interests. Of course, this is how international politics works. Many countries are like that. But I think that in the case of China, it has two important interests in Afghanistan. One is to create an environment in Afghanistan that enables it to bring infrastructure investments in there, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative. And it also wants to degrade the capacities of the ETAN, this Uyghur militant group that worries China. And I think that Beijing, even before the events of the last few days, has seen the Taliban as a willing and friendly interlocutor that would be willing to work with China on those issues, including by providing support for the idea of Chinese investments, infrastructure investments, and also being willing to try to distance itself from Uyghur militants in ways that it would not be prepared to do with Al Qaeda or even the Pakistani Taliban. And so I think that Beijing would be perfectly comfortable with this new government. It would be perfectly comfortable working with it. It's been building relations with the Taliban on informal levels for quite some time. And when you had this delegation of Taliban representatives in China a few weeks ago, that was not the first time that it happened. There have been engagements like that in the past. So I really see China as one of the countries that would be most comfortable with a new regime, even though for sure Beijing would worry about the security
And
implications.
how would that impact on the policies of Troika Plus?
I'm
How
sorry, I
would the
missed.
other countries, how would the other countries react?
Well, I think for Pakistan it would be perfectly fine. Pakistan, of course, is close to China, and I think that Chinese and Pakistani interests are quite fairly convergent in Afghanistan, particularly in terms of Pakistan's support for the Belt and Road Initiative, and it would support efforts by China to bring it into Afghanistan. Now, clearly for India, there would be a concern. I think that for New Delhi has many things to worry about. There are major strategic risks for New Delhi right now. And, not just because of the prospect of a Taliban government in Afghanistan, but also an Afghanistan in which China and Pakistan both would be able to deepen their footprints, which would clearly be a net disadvantage. It's net strategic disadvantage for India, which of course was rivals with both of those countries, has had a long-standing relationship with all post-Taliban governments up to this point. So India stands to lose out a lot if China and also Pakistan move in to be bigger players in Afghanistan.
We have been listening to these statements from American officials that this is a victory for them. So how do you see that? Do you think it's really a victory?
So, sorry, victory for who?
Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Michael, my question to you is that we have been hearing American officials saying that this is the victory for America. Do you really think that this was the victory, and the kind of visuals we are seeing, and in such hurry America left Afghanistan, so hurriedly it left it. Do you think it's a victory?
Yeah, I can't imagine how anyone could reasonably describe what's happened in Afghanistan as a victory for the U.S. I mean, it's certainly a victory for the Taliban. Um, I think, look, the administration is correct when it says that the U.S. was successful with its goals in Afghanistan in, eliminating Al Qaeda threats and all of that. But those victories, those successes came nearly 20 years ago, right? The U.S. went into Afghanistan in October 2001, and it had two initial goals. One was to degrade the Al Qaeda sanctuaries there, and the other was to remove Al Qaeda's Taliban hosts from power. Both were achieved fairly early on. But then you had, nearly 2 decades of a period where the U.S. really struggled to articulate a strategy for why it was still in Afghanistan fighting if it had already achieved those objectives. And clearly, what's happened on the ground in recent years may not be related to the U.S.'s original goals, but the U.S. was still fighting in Afghanistan. So the fact that you had the Taliban in a position to take over the country, and the security situation got so much worse, the terrorism situation got worse with the emergence of ISIS in Afghanistan. So clearly, it's hard to identify. It's hard to pinpoint any ways in which there could be U.S. successes or victories in Afghanistan, or at least nothing since late 2001 when those initial goals were achieved.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining me.